Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl, and today we are continuing our series of revisiting Best Picture nominees. We've already done Triangle of Sadness and The Banshees of Inisherin, but today we have The Fabelmans. And there's just so much to discuss about this movie, so I'm going to hand it back over to you, Matt, to just, introduce our guests as well as set the stage for Steven Spielberg's sort of autobiographical movie.
I want to welcome Josh to the show. Josh is one of my friends from film school. He's a big movie guy. We talk about movies all the time, and I thought it was just perfectly fitting to bring you on to talk about some of the biggest movies of the year. We are going to be starting today with The Fabelmans. I have seen this movie 3 times now. I've liked it more and more every single time I've watched it. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a bit too melodramatic. That feeling has disappeared by my third watch. Dylan, I know that you were kind of lukewarm on it at first. Did you enjoy this more on a rewatch this time?
Definitely. So I watched this for the first time right after Thanksgiving, I think, when it had its initial theatrical release. And like you mentioned, I was a little bit of mixed. I had some stuff I really liked, some stuff I really didn't like. And then I rewatched it within a week, and my rating went from like a solid 7 to a pretty low 8. And with just rewatching again, the things I love, I still love so much, but I still do have some issues. Like, the pacing to me is very up and down. There's times where I'm so engaged, and other times I'm like, okay, I got it. This doesn't need to be 2.5 hours. But above all else, this ensemble is honestly one of my favorites of the year.
I think that I've seen it once, and it's interesting hearing your guys' experience and how it's grown from when you've seen it multiple times, because, yeah, I was pretty lukewarm when I watched it the first time. I was teetering between, 7 or 8. And to me, it just felt like he's a filmmaker that he always focuses on the spectacles. He has some of the biggest spectacles of all time. Now he's trying to make a semi-autobiographical film, and it's supposed to be more sentimental, but it kind of feels like an oxymoron to me, where he's trying to make a sentimental spectacle where every single moment is so impactful, and every small detail in Sammy's upbringing had just so much weight on him. But when everything has so much weight on him, it felt like it was a bit diminished, and I kind of wanted the movie to be a bit more soft-spoken and less feeding all of these emotional moments to the audience and kind of letting them draw their own conclusions at points.
My highlight of this movie has to be Spielberg's direction, because it does really feel like he's using the camera to speak to the audience and say, these were my experiences, this was my life, here's how it relates to my other movies. For a filmmaker who has always made movies about other people, there's a vulnerability in The Fabelmans that feels very unique in his filmography, but at the same time, that vulnerability is a bit masked by him using his typical tricks, which I really like. So how do you feel that this kind of stacks up against some of his other films, Josh?
Honestly, in my opinion, it's one that won't be remembered as fondly as some of his other films, because, he has some of the greatest, most memorable movies of all time. So, I would say it's rather low tier. I've seen 17 of his movies. I'd say I put it ahead of, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Temple of Doom,
That's
West Side Story. I wasn't... Okay. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, West Side Story as well. I wasn't a big West Side Story guy. And I think I suffered a similar thing. I got a lot of feedback from people on The Fabelmans when they saw it at TIFF. They're like, oh, this movie's so good. Made me love movies again, And then I was let down. And same thing for West Side Story. I saw it a bit later than everybody. And then I went into it and I was completely let down. I'd never seen the original West Side Story. I never knew the plot at all, and I felt let down. And I like that movie a lot less than Fabelmans. But we'll get into that some other time. But none of the characters in this movie are as memorable or iconic as some of his other characters. And it might be something hard to admit, but I think some of the most memorable characters of all time, or some of the most memorable spectacles which he likes to make of all time, are part of franchises, and this is a one-off, and I think that doesn't really bring down the quality, but I don't think it's going to be remembered as much because of that fact as well.
Josh hit the nail on the head there, that the fact that this could be so low in his Spielberg filmography while still being a very solid 8 out of 10 just speaks to how great of a filmmaker he is. One thing I really appreciate about this on my multiple rewatches, while I do have issues with the pacing, I do love the editing in certain sequences, especially in Act 2 when he goes to Arizona. That is my favorite personal segment of the whole movie, and I feel like that 45, 50 minutes of the film is near perfection. Everything that's done there, whether it is the character work, whether it is multiple things that they're trying to tell underneath the scenes that eventually come out to the forefront, are all done just miraculously well. And I think my highlight of this movie is how, as you mentioned before, Matt, Spielberg's direction, this is just a form of creative therapy for him, where he's able to talk about his life, his upbringing, things that he hasn't been able to put in the forefront of his movies but have always been there throughout. Now he's able to dive at them full-fledged without having to be restrictive or trying to be like, okay, well, I can kind of talk about this without really getting everything out of me, what I need to get out.
I think everyone can admit that there's at least one acting performance in this film that probably stuck with them in some way. There's 2 Oscar-nominated performances in this film from Michelle Williams and Judd Hirsch. So, Dylan, I want to know, who were your standout performances?
So if I had a personal ballot, I would nominate 2 people from The Fabelmans, but they would be 2 very different ones, because I would keep Judd Hirsch, but instead of having what some people call the lead of the movie of Mitzi Fabelman, performed by Michelle Williams, I would switch it to the other lead of the movie, Gabriel LaBelle, who plays young Sammy, because I think he's able to do just so much in this role, especially being an actor that a lot of people did not know ahead of time. He's able to capture the youth and the spirit and the heart of Spielberg and carry that out through multiple stages of his life. But to talk about Judd Hirsch, because I don't feel like you can talk enough about him. He has like 8.5 minutes in this movie. He devours it. When you leave this movie, I think he's the first thing that you think about after sitting through 2.5 hours. Like, he really only had 8 minutes and captivated me that much. I just think he's able to do so much here, and I'm just very happy at the end of the day he ended up getting the Oscar nom.
I think I agree with your take a lot there, Dylan, because, yeah, I think that I wasn't as high on Michelle Williams as everybody else. Like I was saying, some of my gripes of the movie was that it felt very theatrical and spectacle when I kind of wanted a more mellowed out movie. But I agree, Judd Hirsch, absolute standout. And also, some of my favorite moments were near the beginning when little Sammy, not Gabriel LaBelle, but the one before, whose actor I don't really remember the name of, but just looking at his eyes light up when he's looking at the movie for the first time, or when that toy train is coming towards him and he's like getting that light bulb idea, like the quieter moments where he didn't really have to say anything. He just had, he had a good, like, childlike, innocent look to him of inspiration, and I think those were some of the moments that connected with me a lot. So,
to me, the performances that really stood out, the one that I want to give a shout out to that I haven't seen, like, anyone talk about is Chloe East, who plays Sammy's Christian girlfriend. She is absolutely fucking hysterical in this movie, and I wish she was getting more recognition for that performance. It's such a small role that I don't see why she would get the recognition, but I just hope that she has a very long career, because goddamn, she is so funny in this movie. And I also just want to shout out Seth Rogen. I think that he's such a teddy bear in this movie. He's so endearing, so lovable. You can totally see why this whole family has really bonded with him. While he might not have the showy moments that Paul Dano has, or Judd Hirsch, or Michelle Williams, I just like the presence that he has on screen in this role. But to me, I find that there's a major switch in this movie that takes it from a good film to a great film, because as soon as they get to California, in my mind, it becomes a full-on comedy. I think it's hilarious. There are some amazing scenes between Sammy and Chloe East. The prayer session is ridiculous. Of course, there's the hallway scene at the prom. Those were iconic moments to me, and scenes that I will probably always remember from Spielberg's movies. Josh, did you have any moments that really stuck with you in this film?
Like I said before, I think that some of the little Sammy moments kind of impacted me the most compared to some of the later stuff, because, like I keep saying, I think when they moved to California, that was some of the moments where I kind of felt a bit disconnected from the story, especially when you have him interacting with I forget his name, so I'll just call him the bully, or like the jock, in the hallway. It was a very nice sentiment of what's happening, but it felt very rushed, and it felt, again, very theatrical, where you have the jock like slamming against the locker, be like, "Why did you do this to me?" It's a very nice idea of what's going through his head, but it's like he's processing this all in like 5 minutes and what's happening. I feel like that's something that might like stew in his brain for a few days, and I don't know. Again, I think I just wanted a more sentimental movie, and I need to like put that out of my brain and say, okay, this is Spielberg. This is like theatrical and to enjoy it more. But yeah, so, some of the moments at the very beginning with young Sammy, I don't know, those ones hit me the hardest personally.
I think the young Sammy stuff is amazing. I love the whole movies as dream sequence that is being memed a little bit online, but it's very good in the film. But not to load everything on young Sammy going to Arizona age Sammy, where like I mentioned before, I think this movie's at its highest. I love the sequences where he is shooting his own movies, going back to the whole fact that this is therapy for Spielberg. It was also therapy for Sammy because it's how he was able to do with all his at-home drama and baggage that was going on there in a more artistic way where he's able to connect with people in his community, his friends, even his family on a larger level. I really, really, really think that the editing sequence where he first discovers that the affair that's going on is one of, if not the best examples of editing this year overall. And I know this movie did miss out on the editing nomination at the Oscars, which, as I mentioned before, it would not be in mine because of the overall pacing problem I think this movie does have. But if you can nominate a scene, I would 100% nominate that one. And I guess to also agree, the California sequence would be where the movie kind of goes off the edge for me a little bit. I just feel like there's a lot of great stuff there, like the prayer session is amazing. I really like the scene where he shows his movie at the end of the year senior celebration. However, I feel like there's a lot of stuff there that is just needs to be trimmed down a little bit and get this movie from 2.5 to like 2.15. And then I think a lot of my issues in California would be settled because we have everything that's set up with his family trauma, and we get there and not much is really dive deeper. It's like, okay, we have our conclusions of what Mitzi's going to do or Bert's going to do or what even Sammy himself's going to do, but it was all very telegraphed ahead of time, and I feel like you didn't need to spend even more scenes dive into it. However, I will say the final sequence in California where he goes to the lot kind of redeems that whole session for me.
So this is funny. Yeah. We each have a different location where our favorite parts of the movie takes place. Because Josh, you're New Jersey, Dylan, you're Arizona, and I'm California. Dylan, I think that you and I can both agree that John Williams being nominated for the Oscar for original score was something that we were really both rooting against. On a rewatch, did you notice the score more this time? And how do you feel about the nomination at this point?
I mean, I still stand true that the music that's during that editing sequence I just talked about is amazing. But you know what? That's not Bach. John Williams. Exactly. And all of the songs that are John Williams are not the memorable ones because I just had a very long drive, speaking of New Jersey. I was in New Jersey the other day, and I listened to the FABELMANS score because it's only like 30 minutes. I was able to get through it quick. And every time I was like, this song's good. I would look to see who composed it. It was never John Williams. So to me, that's why the score nomination to me is something I was actively rooting against because there were so many other movies, whether they're shortlisted or not, that just have very memorable moments that were actual original composition. While this one does have memorable moments, they just weren't original composition.
So here's my biggest question. I've seen a lot of people online say that if this exact movie was made by someone else who wasn't Steven Spielberg, it would be completely overlooked and no one would care about it at all. How do you feel about that, Josh?
It makes a lot of sense. It's a movie about Spielberg's childhood and about this director that everybody has come to love. And it's a tough subject to navigate because he is a filmmaker that really does deserve to be celebrated, and he deserves to be able to tell this story about his upbringing and how that made him who he is. But I do think that if it was made just by some random director, that it wouldn't be as celebrated, and that it's hard to separate the real life from the actual content in the movie because we really are, everybody when you're watching it, you're making that connection to his real life and what really happened and who he came to be. Because, yeah, if some other guy directed it, we would be like, oh, did this kid go on to make movies? Like, what's the deal here? But, yeah, that's pretty much what I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've said this on the show before, actually. If this wasn't Spielberg, it would just be looked at by everyone like Belfast was from Kenneth Branagh, where it's like, yeah, we know who that is, but like we don't really care that much about who he is. And I think I still like this movie. Like, I'm not saying that this movie shouldn't have been made just because it's Spielberg. That's the only reason it got funding. I'm glad this movie exists. I had a lot of fun watching it every time. Just I don't think most people have said, hey, this is my number one for director, or this is the best picture frontrunner, or any of the things people were saying ahead of this movie's release, and even when it first came out, if it wasn't for the fact that it's about Steven Spielberg, made by Steven Spielberg.
I guess this time watching, I kind of felt differently. In the past, I've definitely felt a little bit more like people would completely overlook it. But I think the film has enough qualities of its own. I think the script is really funny. It's really a smart script that doesn't entirely rely on us knowing who Spielberg is. That said, I mean, I do think that part of the failure of the movie in the box office is because it's not called the Spielbergs, it's called the Fabelmans, and no one knows who Sammy Fabelman is. And I think that they kind of failed to market the fact that this was a Spielberg biopic. I do think if this was made by someone else, if you added in a couple scenes at the beginning, at the end, some moments of flashing forward and showing how successful this kid becomes. One of my favorite movies is Cinema Paradiso, which does just that. It's about a big filmmaker in Italy who returns home for a funeral, and he remembers his childhood growing up and loving movies. But definitely, I agree, knowing who Spielberg is, knowing who he becomes, it definitely makes the movie a lot stronger. But let's finish this off. Let's talk some Oscar chances. The Fabelmans was the early frontrunner that everyone was talking about. Everyone was saying this is a lock for Best Picture. I remember people on Twitter after the TIFF premiere saying, I know that it's only September, but can we just all admit that the race is over and the Fabelmans is winning Best Picture? That's not happening now. So I want to know what you guys think. What Oscars does the Fabelmans stand a chance at winning?
I mean, to combat what you just said there, all season long, I was telling you, I don't know why people have Spielberg at number one for the Fabelmans. He's not going to win. And as we're seeing that now, he's probably not going to win. There's still a shot, but I'm not. I think he's number 3 in director. But at this moment, I think Fabelmans walks away with 0 wins. In fact, I think it may be the only Best Picture nominee outside of Triangle of Sadness that gets 0 wins on the night, which is still weird to say out loud, but kind of feels right.
Yeah, I think the only real chance it has would be with director, just because, again, he is Steven Spielberg and that pedigree is there. But yeah, I agree. I think the other categories, there's just so many other locks or just battles that aren't with the Fabelmans in the conversation to begin with.
I definitely have to agree with you guys. That said, I do still think it has a very strong chance at director, and I'm really nervous that John Williams might win score for this. I am nervous that he could do it and take away that rightful score win from Babylon. There's a distinct possibility that could happen. But let's just pretend Fabelmans is still going to win Best Picture. Dylan, what do you think it would need as a package to win Best Picture?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned score because I think that would come along if this was winning picture because, like, hey, we're celebrating Spielberg. We're going to celebrate John Williams. And guess what? We'll also celebrate Tony Kushner because original screenplay would come along with it. And at that point, you have those 3. Maybe I could see a world where if Fabelmans was a top 1 or 2 contender, that Michelle Williams was in the conversation, but I still don't think that she would win because we're seeing that right now with Michelle Yeoh, where she's in the presumed frontrunner, but that's still not going to win the lead actress award, at least what many pundits are saying. So I think that if this whole hypothetical, if, hey, Fabelmans was the number 1 overall and nothing else had a shot, I think it would take away 4 awards because picture, director, score, and screenplay.
In a hypothetical world where the Fabelmans wins Best Picture, Michelle Williams has to be nominated for supporting actress because then she'd be in the winning conversation. That's not the world we live in. I think we can all admit at this point that the Fabelmans is kind of done. It's gone the way of The Irishman or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's a big movie from a huge legacy filmmaker that came out, everyone loved, and now it's just not performing at the Oscars the way that we expected it to. But we're going to wrap this up. Does anyone have any final thoughts?
I guess to chime in real quick, I have the Fabelmans all the way down at number 7 right now, and my Best Picture chances to win. Because it's not going to win anything. I have All Quiet at 6, Tar and Elvis right there, Maverick at 3, and then the top 2, the only ones I really think could win. But I'll hand it over to Josh for his final thoughts.
When we were talking about our favorite moments, there was one other moment that I kind of did want to chime in on, because when he was making that war movie with a scouts troop, I love scenes when it's about filmmaking and then they find the magic in those moments, especially when that one guy in his troop that was the one survivor after everybody else was killed and he just walks off. Oh, that scene was absolutely amazing. And it was a good year for movies about movies because I think the standout scene in Babylon for me as well was the scene where they were just like frantically just making all these movies. There's a million sets around and he has to go and grab the camera and everything. I think, yeah, those two scenes combined this year were some of my most memorable.
But that brings us to the end of our discussion on the Fabelmans. Make sure you like this video, leave a comment, let us know what you guys think. But as always, thank you for watching. My name is Matt.
And my name is Dyl, and this is Fantasy Filmball.